Good morning from sunny Texas. Welcome to the Signal Room. Lots of goodies in this episode. We'll be mainly discussing global communication architecture beyond tooling and into long-term positioning, the build versus buy question, and ultimately multilingual data orchestration this morning. We're approaching a very important international event, though, guys. And so I thought we would start with a little segment on the World Cup and communications within the World Cup. Every 4 years, it becomes a real-world stress test for global communication and billions of people, so to speak, dozens of languages, real-time moments that can't wait for translation queues or post-editing cycles. 4 years ago, most of this was still stitched together. Localized content here, translated support there. Slowly but surely, the World Cup is getting with the programming, is getting a lot more professional. Quick question. What do you think has changed if the World Cup were run with 2022 level language infrastructure today? What would feel broken or outdated to fans? Wada?
Well, it's the World Cup. It's been around for decades, and I think the passion for the sport will outweigh any language barriers. I think the signals this time around have to do with geography and logistics. In 2022, Qatar, small country, a couple of languages, Arabic and English. And this time around, we have 3 large countries and multiple languages. So we're pretty much moving from a contained multilingual ecosystem to overlapping multimodal and multilingual realities. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Anybody have any input?
I think on the World Cup, I think first of all, I want to apologize or address everyone that is upset that Sweden made it to the World Cup. I don't know how much it made the US news cycle, but it was a big deal, at least in Scandinavia and parts of Europe. Sweden finished last in the qualifying group, didn't win a single game. I think we drew 2 games and lost like 5 or something. But we did win our Nations League group a couple of years before, without realizing that it would actually get us a spot in the knockout stages. So, and then we beat Ukraine and Poland and actually made it to the World Cup, which led to an outcry in Europe. Italy didn't make it. Poland didn't make it, and they all did great in the qualifying stage. But Sweden was terrible, but then sort of turned it around at the end. So sorry, everyone, but not sorry. I guess one takeaway for sort of multilingual communication, I guess, in that is don't hire a Danish coach to your national team unless you're Sweden, or if you're Sweden at least. If you're Danish, I guess it's okay. I hope that's not too controversial. But I think on your question, I don't necessarily think that it would feel outdated or broken, as most of the consumer-facing technologies haven't really changed that much, at least in terms of wide adoption. But I do think that the 2026 edition feels more prepared. I read up a bit on it, and it feels like they've put in more effort in being ready for the fact that we have 48 countries this time, not 32. That's usually the case. So it might be more of a positive spin on it that World Cup visitors would be delighted this year what's possible with multilingual AI rather than disappointed.
Do you have any anecdotes, Vincent?
Well, first of all, Ireland disappointingly didn't make it there. So I'm wearing my jersey of the mighty Leeds United in honour of our first win at Man United for 45 years or something. I think there's been a step in the right direction. I think the fact that there's multiple direct native languages involved is definitely a step forward. But I still think that a lot of the heavy lifting has got to be done on a personal level. I think that, there's so many languages, 5 or 6 isn't really got to get there. So I think people will use their phones more. I think technology has improved a lot, so that's going to make it a little bit more seamless in general compared to the last one. I think it'd be fairly interesting to see what happens with the next Euros in Europe, where, if they manage to keep up with it, where there is a lot more native languages, I think that would be interesting. And I think technology-wise, I think the experience might be different. I think one of the guys from our group, CK, worked previously with a sports channel, sports broadcaster, and he was telling me the story about how they used AI to translate live commentaries for the football matches. And it was really interesting that the solution they put in place, because all they did was, like in the old days of YouTube, they just made a buffer. They made a 10 or 15 second buffer, and that gave it enough time to deal with the latency of translating the commentary. So they were able to actually live translate commentary from English into Spanish for the Mexican market, for example. And I think that innovations like that are probably going to make it more enjoyable for the home experience as well as the in-place experience. I've never had a chance to go to a World Cup, probably never will now with the way the Irish team are playing, but I definitely watch every match I can, and I think there will be enhanced experiences around that. I think that was a really interesting solution to a simple enough problem, very elegant and very sophisticated for, something that in the past you would have had to have an actual commentary team commentating in Spanish, for example.
So you're saying, for the sake of communication, the purest soccer fan should wait 10 seconds to see their team score the goal, just so we can do the translation in between?
Well, when you're streaming online anyway, you're probably 10 seconds or 15 seconds off anyway. It doesn't really make that much difference. Even live TV has a delay on it anyway. So it's really just about how you experience it as it's happening. And I do think that's going to be enhanced for sure.
So you're going to have to indulge me for a second here, because I've been waiting to tell this story for 30 years or so. I'm going to date myself probably by telling you the story, but my reference point for the World Cup is a bit broader. I arrived in the Bay Area the summer before the 1994 World Cup, and I actually worked, believe it or not, for the organizing committee at Stamford Stadium in June of 1994. Nothing glamorous. I was in the catering tents, but back then there were no fancy protocols, and we had a badge. I believe the color was red, and we were told in a briefing before the World Cup that we shouldn't even try to get into the games with that badge, because it wasn't the right color. They wouldn't let us in. And then the first day that I was working there, we finished the catering job right before the second half of the Brazil-Russia game, and I tried to get in nevertheless, and I got in. I actually watched the second half of that game all the way back in 1994. Of course, nowadays I don't think you could do that kind of thing anymore at all, because everything is so digitized, and the security would be on a whole nother level. But that's my anecdote that I quickly wanted to share with you guys, that hardly anybody has ever heard about. But I've been to a World Cup game, although illegally, if you want to call it that.
That's the year Brazil won as well, right?
I think so, yeah. I was actually thinking about that the other day, and I remember Switzerland was...
They did, and I only know because Sweden finished third and we lost to Brazil in the semifinals.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
My only memory of that World Cup was Ireland beat Italy in Giant Stadium. Ray Houghton scored a goal. So it's still a famous day in Irish football.
We talk about that all the time in Sweden still, like 30 years later.
I thought we were going to poke Wada'a about Beirut the whole episode through, but then she let us know in prep for this that she's really rooting for France. So there's not a lot of trash talking to be done about that. We're going to be hanging our head in shape, because every other World Cup they're making it to the finals these days. So that's an easy team to root for, Wada'a.
Yeah, I need to get myself a jersey, because I tried to put on a jersey right before this call. I raided my kids' closets, but all of the jerseys are either too big or worn out. So
what do you guys think? What will the AI-powered multilingual customer support look like on match day, and how far have we really come since 2022?
So I read about one use case that I found interesting. So I read about something called Pocket Talk. I hadn't heard of this before. I don't know if you've heard of this one, but it's a gadget for automatic translation. So the World Cup use case is less about entertainment and more focused on safety and frontline operations. It's not a FIFA thing, but it's some of the cities. I know that they do it in Santa Clara, for example, in Bay Area for the games there, that all the support staff carry this device in order to be able to communicate across all languages, which is kind of cool, I think. And the argument is that safety and hospitality are inseparable, and communication is key in both. So they will be carrying that device to support people basically going to games. But I think you'll see a ton of different multilingual AI use cases, and that in itself is, of course, a strong signal that it's becoming more of a mainstream use case these days.
Did you notice about Pocket Talk? They're a Japanese company, and their marketing department deserves a lot of credit on this, because when I read about Pocket Talk, I scoured the internet to find actually the link to FIFA. And although they're an app that is heavily promoting and making it seem like they're part of the FIFA effort, they really don't have a contract at all. It's just their marketing department that is pitching it as, so that's at least what I concluded, as if they are the solution for person-to-person multilingual communication at the World Cup. So kudos to them for the great marketing. I actually found this Navilance Project Corporation that's been awarded a contract for language access and ADA navigation for the 2026 World Cup. And it's not actually a chatbot or a support queue. It's an embedded QR code that the World Cup apparently is going to have everywhere around the stadiums. And when you scan it with your phone, it gives you instructions in over 40 languages. So I thought that was really interesting that they are capitalizing on the QR code thing, and that you can actually use that kind of technology to disseminate messages in a lot of languages at the same time without actually showing the languages on the billboard, so to speak.
Well, I want to go back to what Jonas just said about safety and security. I mean, fair points, but how do you manage this across 3 different countries? Very large countries. I think Qatar set the bar quite high from the safety and hospitality lenses. And if we look at the multilingual experience, in 2022, the World Cup app, the stadium apps deployed probably 5 to 10 chatbot agents to support fans instantly. But then there was a huge reliance on the human factor for urgent matters, gate changes, stadium updates. And they were able to contain that because, again, it's a single multilingual environment. But now, if you look at the World Cup app in 2026, it lists English plus 5 other languages without even specifying which languages. But that alone, to me, signals how far multilingual strategy has to go at the platform level, especially for such a mega tournament. So my hope for 2026 is that the LLMs will hopefully deploy chatbots that will cover over 60 languages across 3 different countries, will able to shift gears when you switch countries, because remember, some fans will land in the US, watch a game, go down to Mexico, go back up to Canada. So there's a lot to manage. And the infrastructure or the orchestration at this point, or the architecture, become the hero here, because the LLMs or the chatbots are going to be as good as the glossaries, the style guides, the language feeding them.
The problem here is, to both of your points about Pocket Talk kind of looking like the official thing, but it's not. And then to your point, Wada'a, that it needs to be orchestrated, it needs to be seamless. It's very much not seamless right now, right? Just based on that. So that's going to be interesting to see how they play that.
Actually talk about exactly the same thing, that if it's not mandated by FIFA, how is it going to be consistent? Do you know what I mean? I agree with that. I think it's something I hadn't really considered, how it would work in the security or in that experiential space. I think that maybe that's something that probably we'll learn a few lessons here. And I think the cultures in all three house countries are very different around the way they will manage some of this sort of stuff. So I think it's going to be interesting, and hopefully it will raise the bar for future tournaments. I do think it's moving in the right direction.
The guys at Pocket Talk probably not going to appreciate this, but one of the things that I thought right away when I saw the solution is that it's a standalone little pocket gadget that you need to carry around. And that's immediately the Achilles heel in my mind as well. Who's going to be carrying around an extra gadget and count that other people are going to have the same gadget, or this is something that everybody's going to be carrying around. If I was in their product team, I would be telling them they need to figure out something to put that on my phone so I don't have to carry another gadget. But that was just my opinion about that.
I think that was the problem the Rabbit R1 had, that it was a new device. It was an excellent device, but essentially it was able to operate just as an app. I think it also shows the fact that they are looking at producing an actual device kind of shows how big the gap is. They've perceived that there is quite a major gap there, and perhaps it's something that needs to be considered more important and more significant as we move forward, especially 48 teams this year.
Pocket Talk is actually talking about 90 languages now or something like that. So that's probably why they need an additional gadget, I would think, and it's so complicated. There's another current signal that I quickly wanted to discuss at the start of this episode with you guys, and it concerns vibe coding. There's been a wave of posts these last couple of weeks from builders showing full products being launched by one person in a matter of days. And that's what people are calling vibe coding. Even Reese Witherspoon is now getting in on the bandwagon. You can look that up after the show. That's a true story. And I was particularly captivated by a post of a guy that I follow, Greg Eisenberg, about the things that are keeping him up at night about this development. The speed is real, the structure maybe not so much. The barrier to building, though, has collapsed a little bit, and I think there's movement in global communication and in the localization industry about that. I actually have some inside knowledge, if you want, about companies that are working on integrating this type of capability in their platforms, and so we're going from an original movement that was maybe a waterfall where you plan for 18 months to deliver exactly what nobody needs anymore by the time you put it out, to agile, where you deliver something usable at every step, but the CEO keeps on asking, where is the car? To now delivering it within days, where you get the car done on day one, and you just have to deal with the fact that it has 6 wheels and the doors are on backwards, and you have to build it as you go along, so to speak. Is all of this happening faster than organizations can adapt to, or enterprises structurally too slow for this shift? What do you think is going to happen with the SaaS companies out there that are going to have to adjust to this type of movement?
I don't think it's only the SaaS companies. I think it's everyone, honestly. And we had a leadership meeting a couple of weeks back, and we kind of posed this question internally as well. We've all seen those companies that you were referring to, Stefan, around being founded a few years ago and then having hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue today. So Lovable is one example that I looked at. So growing extremely quickly and doing it in a way that is different to what enterprises have done in the past on the tech side. So I think for SaaS companies and LSPs, the like, I think it makes sense to look at those organizations and how they do that differently. So Lovable specifically has this pod structure, which is not new in itself, but I think the level of autonomy that they have in those development pods is higher than in the past. So basically they're able to make decisions quickly themselves and pivot as necessary and build parts, very specific parts of a product within that small pod, instead of having a much larger R&D organization building the software. the challenge for the rest of the organization, honestly, is to keep up with that. And that's what we've seen at Centific, and that kind of posed that question internally in the leadership meeting, that how do we need to change the rest of the organization to keep up with R&D team that is already operating in that more fast-paced setup?
I'm not sure if I have a strong opinion about it. I'm still wearing the observer's hat at this point because the dust has not settled in that space yet. And yes, anybody can vibe code, but how do you control this and monitor this in a complex environment? What becomes scarce in a situation like this, if everybody's vibe coding, is the orchestration, the governance, the consistency. The challenge is no longer simply calling ChatGPT or DeepL or Claude. It is deciding when to use what for which type of audience, which type of content. And vibe coding does not include this at this point. So you can have multiple groups within an organization vibe coding, but what is the governance and the orchestration level? Where does it sit? If we go back to the World Cup example, language has to shift not just based on country and language. It has to shift also on the user type. Are you a guest? Are you a host? Are you a support agent? Are you an organizer? So companies like Uber or Booking.com, they do very well. They dynamically adapt messaging based on where you land. Now apply this to a mega tournament like the World Cup, okay? The fans will have to go to probably book their tickets in the US and then receive notifications in Spanish and then escalate probably in French, Canadian. How does this work if using a tool that was vibe coded on a whim? So I go back to the fact that orchestration is key. Yes, everybody can code, everybody can build, but without orchestration and governance, that multilingual system or whatever tool that has been coded will break when it matters the most. So again, I still feel that there's a lot to discover in that space.
Do you think that the real bottleneck maybe isn't maybe building anymore, but it's the decision making, the approvals, the risk management, all that slows things down? And in larger organizations, that's going to still take a considerable amount of time. If you're a one-person builder, none of those barriers to entry are there anymore. So that's a particular interesting development, I think. How do we best adjust to this new reality in global communication, Vincent?
One of the things that we need to look at is it's not about the big idea. I think there's been a fundamental change in the way, I think the vibe piece of it kind of confuses people because that kind of makes it seem like everybody can do it and anybody can do it. And really, the way I look at it is it's still coding. You know, you're still like, I'm very interested in the whole concept of vibe coding. I've been working on different projects of that for probably gone on a year now, you know, since maybe even more. And I think that's really improved recently, but still you need to have the experience and the knowledge of what you're trying to do. I've built a CAT tool that's AI enabled, that runs locally on the machine, very little resources. And it's really aimed at not enterprise. It's aimed at individual users who want to perhaps localize again. Want to be able to localize the app that they're building, that sort of thing. I don't think it's just a case of, oh, well, now that we have this capability, everybody in the world is going to become a coder. That didn't happen when WYSIWYG was invented for websites. No, it still took the skill, time to learn the skill and to learn the expectations. It takes a lot of iteration on how to work it out. I spent a lot of today building a client portal for a demonstration that we're going to have later today. And that was from scratch. In the past, that was a week and a half or 2 week project, whereas I was able to prototype something, get it there very quickly. And I think that the movement is going to start being more around small pieces of personal software rather than the large SaaS model. I think, you know, I've built a number of things that I still use that are small scripts, small little silly little things like turning an MD file into a format of the Word document. I been copy and pasting on it, copy and pasted it twice to share some stuff with the rest of the guys. And then I was like, why am I copy and pasting it? And I just asked AI to build me a script to generate it in the format I wanted. And now I just dropped the MD file on it. I didn't have the capability, even though I do have coding capabilities, the amount of effort that would have taken me in the past to do it, it wasn't worth doing. Whereas now, if I can do it quicker than I can transform one document, well, why wouldn't I do it? And I think that's something that's undervalued. I think software has got to become more personalized. It's got to become more defined by what the user wants rather than what the architect or the builder decides that it's going to be. And I think we're seeing that in many areas, like CRMs. There's a lot of the agent tools now can build you a CRM tool if you're only needing it at a certain level. So put some of this functionality and some of this capability much more in people's grasp. People will be able to operate at a higher level with a lower barrier to entry. But I don't think it's necessarily going to mean, oh, well, then we just tell the computer what we want and it builds the software for us. It's the iteration and the knowledge of what you need is as important as the ability to write the code.
Maybe that's the nuance and the takeaway, that it's not just everybody as an individual that is doing vibe coding now. Even the pros are doing vibe coding. Nobody's writing all the lines of code themselves anymore. They're being written by an LLM, and they're being checked kind of in a post-editing kind of way that is very similar to what we're doing in localization, so to speak. Are language capabilities being absorbed into broader enterprise platforms? And is that the direct conclusion or extension of that, Wada'a?
Well, most major companies did not just add localization. They embedded it into their multilingual capability as soon as they started expanding globally. And that started probably in the 2010, Netflix, Amazon, Booking. They've all enabled subtitles and closed captions or catalogs or purchasing in different languages. So I don't see this as a new trend happening. The minute or the signal is we're going global. We're expanding in certain markets, so we need to enable language support. In the past, it used to be probably reactive, like they will find out later that, oh, it's a requirement or it's a compliance need. But now I feel that it's becoming at the system level, and it's been around for a while, so I don't see it as a new trend.
I still think that we run into these situations a lot where new companies that are beginning to go global haven't thought about what it actually means to go global and to localize and be ready for that. But I also agree that for sure it's not new. I think we've seen this a long time, 10 plus years at different levels. It's not necessarily exactly what we're talking about, but a lot of the tech companies have had language platforms built into their overall tech stack for a long time. That includes proprietary translation management systems. I would say most of the big tech companies have built their own rather than use an off-the-shelf TMS for that. So having language in their tech stack is not new, but even having language capabilities in platforms or products is not new. The oldest example that I could think of was Skype. And it's probably, 10 years ago now that they started offering live translation in Skype. It was a pretty big deal at the time. I don't know how the uptake was, but at probably around 10 years ago, and that sort of merged into Teams, where you can get now live translation of your own voice, so synthesized voice into multiple languages directly in Teams. Spotify offers that language capabilities for language automatic translation of lyrics or podcasts. It was a big announcement last year, a big release for Apple when they did the AirPods Pro 3 with the live translation feature. So there's a lot of examples of companies having that language layer in their products. Another angle on it is companies that actually start offering localization or translation language capabilities in the product, even though it's not part of their core scope, as a service in it. So for Teams and those examples, it's just enhancing the user experience, but One example that I thought of when, in the case of actually offering this as a service, was Articulate last year. Suddenly showed up at a lot of the conferences, right, offering localization in their platform against a fee. So when you build e-learning content in Articulate, you can actually get it localized in platform, and there's a relatively competitive cost factor there as well. So I think this already happens on multiple levels and has been happening for quite some time.
How broad is it though, Jonas? Google released their live translation capabilities, but it's still only available in 12 countries. As part of, I think that the long tail of languages is still a challenge.
100%. And I don't know what the uptake is. I don't know. Teams think it's like 8 languages or so. I don't remember what Skype had back in the day. I think they offered it in many more languages, but I don't know how the quality was for that. I'm biased, of course. I don't know how good the Articulate localization offering is. There are definitely limitations in that, and it's not their core business. So it would be kind of disappointing for all LSPs out there if they would get beaten by someone who's not doing this as their day job. But it's still a nice addition to what they offer their customers.
To me, this fits in a larger development too, where the TMS is no longer the center of gravity of everything we do in localization and global communication. It's one component of a larger ecosystem, and enterprises are building language into their internal AI layers. So that's a completely different paradigm. And language is being embedded into product.
I wanted to comment on what Jonas mentioned around companies not having localization or a geosensitive maturity when it comes to multilingual support, and sometimes building something that will not scale globally. Totally agree on the marketing side of things, content creation type of things, but most buyers now at the system level, you'll find that the technology team and the dev team is becoming more mindful and aware about the global needs than the other subdivisions in marketing or in e-learning or in HR. So they've evolved quite a bit when it comes to considering what are the needs from a system infrastructure, because it's quite costly. But still in marketing, in e-learning or various brand functions, people still build for the US audience only. So I just wanted to point this out.
All right, we're diving in the quick fire round right now. You guys ready? True or false? Here we go. The CEO of Anthropic just said this week that the one-person billion-dollar company will exist by 2026. True or false?
False.
False.
All right. Institutional investors are dumping U.S. technology stocks at near record pace these last couple of weeks. Sign of the times or speed bump?
Speed bump.
Yeah, I'd say speed bump as well. It's very flexible. It's a very fluid market.
Yep, people.
Translation quality is now synonymous with governance. True or false?
I think we covered this before. True. The quality is not about spelling and grammar anymore. It's about effectiveness and end user response.
Agreed.
True.
Okay, I gave up on the World Cup, but maybe why don't you give me your predictions now? Who will win the World Cup in 2026 and why?
I'm not an expert in football, but you have strong contenders there. I mean, I would say either Germany, France, and the US has a home court advantage.
US haven't a hope. No danger. If they get out of the group, they're lucky. I think Spain are in with a shout.
Let's say Germany. Keep my wife happy.
I think it's going to be Brazil this year. We'll see.
Oh, I don't think so.
We will set foot on the moon again in the next 2 years. True or false?
True.
False.
False.
Aliens are amongst us and we will meet them before the end of the year.
True. No, not before the end of the year.
Oh my God, this is interesting.
But not before the end. Please. I mean, enough excitement for 1 year.
I'm waiting until I see the Spielberg movie.
Oh, I have a follow-up on this one. Volunteering to go to Mars, or is Barcelona exotic enough, Vince?
That's enough for me. It's hard enough to get me out of Barcelona, let alone going to Mars.
What about you? What, a trip to Mars or Tuscany all day long with a glass of wine?
Tuscany all day long with a glass of wine and some good olive oil.
Good. Jonas, Mars or Texas in the summer?
Well, if you put it like that, then maybe Mars. But no, I'm planning too much as it is.
The temperatures might be more or less the same.
Very similar.
All right. Next topic is our primary round. We're already far into the episode, but we'll give it a shot anyway. We're going to talk about building versus buying in AI localization and explore structural decision making. Guys, why has the build versus buy debate resurfaced in the AI area, you think?
Because of opportunity. Because there is, it goes back to the vibe coding thing. There's an opportunity now that people perceive that they can build stuff themselves. It may not be right, but that's the perception.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's fairly obvious, right? It's all about cost and the possibility of actually doing it. AI did change that game completely. So it's obvious that people will build more than they have bought in the past.
Well, I want to talk more about the vendor's narrative here, because for years, buy was the obvious decision, right? The greatest tools, the SDLs and the memo queues were too complex to replicate and too complex to compete with. So people were resorting to buy. But now the LLM kind of leveled the playing field, and any system engineer with API connection or integration to Claude or ChatGPT can pretty much provide a decent translation for certain types of content. I'm ruling out creative here. So it's this kind of leveled the playing field, but the vendors had to switch their narrative. The pitch of we have a technology that you can't replicate is gone. Now it's more of we have a strong solution that integrates with all of your tools and plays nicely from a governance and compliance perspective. So the argument is back, but not because buy always wins, but because for the first time in decades, it's a fair fight. Now, what's happening now is that, the vendors obviously are responding AI into their system, and they're trying to compete. But imagine if you're a localization manager on the buyer side, sitting in a budget meeting with a group of engineers, and you're trying to justify a 6-figure platform contract when the engineers can tell you that they could build or replicate the same in a quarter. I think this is the signal here. This is the question, not the build versus buy.
But I think the challenge there is if you actually do the math, right? If it takes them a quarter, how much is an engineer? Depending on where they are, right? If they're in the US, for sure, it's more expensive than even the annual fee of a typical TMS. And then the ongoing cost of maintaining it. I really think you need to look at the math of that. Even if you think it's quick to build it, there's an ongoing cost there as well to consider.
So that's the narrative that the vendor needs to adopt instead of saying we have a tool that can integrate. I think elevating or double-clicking on the fact that, yes, you can, but here's how much it's going to cost you, versus the platform out of the box. You have full ownership, control without ownership, and it can do this and that for you, which outweighs or which is much more cost-effective than having FTE engineers building the platform for you.
Yeah. The other challenge that we've seen on that note is not just the ongoing cost of it, but you might have a passionate manager, team of developers that wants to build something in this space, but if it's not the core business of that organization, it's very likely that they'll move on to something else eventually, and then you'll have a hard time finding someone that is as passionate as that team. And we've seen time and time again that sort of the capabilities in the platform and the value of the platform declines quite quickly then over time when we don't have the original team anymore. And you can be sure that the tech company or the language provider that has started building that tool, they will probably be around still to continue to support it.
When does building that internal AI capability actually make sense, Vincent?
Well, I think everybody will have to build some sort of level of internal capability. I think there's kind of two aspects of it. I think the existing kind of TMS infrastructure that allowed for the walled garden and that kind of lock-in was really to do with complexity. People were building tools for the most difficult use case. And I think that's kind of changed now. Software is being managed different. I think it's been designed different. Stuff has been externalized a lot more. And as Wada'a said earlier, the development teams are much more sophisticated around that approach now. So the idea of being able to have graded content or graded challenges kind of maybe makes me think that there'll be more of a hybrid system around it. I think, though, there is a risk around it because I've seen it a few times where, particularly at the really large software suppliers, where developers think they can build a TMS and they just can't. They've experience of building a CMS, they've experience of workflow management, and they kind of look at it and go, oh, well, on the surface that all looks the same. But when you start digging down into leverage and concordance and all of the little pieces that make a TMS significant, I've actually seen a lot of failures. And what can happen is you end up with a tool that's a lot less efficient and just pushes the problem down. The number of times I've gone into architect or to analyze a process that's been set up between the supplier and the client, and you kind of realize, well, someone on this client side has come up with this crazy way of doing it, and the supplier has just facilitated it because you're trying to keep the business, and you see engineers doing copy and pasting, you see PMs doing copy and pasting going, and things just kind of gravitate back to spreadsheets at the end of it. I think simpler solutions that are more focused is going to be more significant. And I think, again, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the vibe coding. You need to know what you're trying to achieve and understand what the risks or the challenges are. And I think that's still something that, if that knowledge moves, well, then the ability to maintain what you're already been developing moves with it, to Jonas's point.
Does that mean that we're now moving the conversation from tool development maybe to data leverage? And is data orchestration the real competitive mode for industry going forward?
Let me sort of circle back to Vincent's point first, because as we're sort of approaching the end of the time that we have today, I think a lot of what we talked about aligns. So if you asked about the stock market, is the fact that they're moving away from SaaS companies a speed bump or not? I think it's very much a speed bump, because everything that Vincent said is pointing to the fact that you need everything else around it. It's not just enough to be able to vibe code. You need marketing, sales, you need the data, of course, you need operations, you need to be able to handle the order to cash flow process and so on. So it is definitely not enough to just be able to code. And I think the value of that expertise is going to be more evident than it has been in the past. It hasn't really changed. And that should be encouraging to LSPs as well, that the 20, 30 years of experience that many companies have is not easy to replace. And that's what we've seen in enterprises not in the space. They're not aware of what it means to build a TMS. And there are definitely weaknesses in that. They're missing out on a lot of stuff if they only focus on building. And maybe one takeaway there is that partner instead. You can build certain parts of it, but find a good partner to work with. Circling back to your question, Stefan, data is a big part of that, and orchestrating the data is super important. Everyone has access to the same models. The model is definitely not the moat if you're willing to pay for the best models. Data is, of course, needed for specificity and the specific use cases, but maybe even more than the data, the orchestrations. I would put the emphasis on orchestration rather than on the data, even though the data is important as well. Being able to build that full workflow, how you leverage the data, and really cutting it short. I think there's a lot that we could talk about here, but the signal of each post-edited word or segment, each translated segment, having those signals feed back into the model is extremely important, and that's part of the core of that orchestration layer.
Yeah, maybe the data orchestration topic is something we can pick up in one of the next episodes of the Signal Room. There's certainly a lot of meat on the bone there for us to discuss further. We've already come to the end, more or less, of this episode, and I wanted to end this episode by asking you all a recommendation for a person that you follow closely on social media. I assume everyone has several, but if I had to ask you to pick one that is particularly helpful in the global communication space, which one would you pick and why?
If you need a good dose of fear, I recommend Tristan Harris. I like his approach. I think he makes sense in on various topics. And he mentioned something a couple of weeks ago that I found very interesting around social media and AI and social media. Social media influences decisions, and AI automates the influence. So imagine how things would look like from a buying perspective, purchasing perspective, and decision making on social media in a few months from now. So I recommend Tristan Harris. I think he keeps me grounded.
Tristan Harris, I'm writing it down. Vincent?
I don't have someone for social media, to be honest with you. I was going to recommend some music again this week, so maybe I'll do that.
All right, but what music should we be listening to? Go ahead, man. You're keeping us in festive mood, so...
Yeah. So, well, this week I'd recommend the Wada'a Fahel This Is the Sea album. It's 40 years old. I've recently rediscovered it. I put it on for my 3-year-old going to school in the morning. He's asked for it every day for the last 6 weeks. And it's made me rediscover the album. And I think if you've any interest in language at all, there's some fantastic poetry in the sounds in that. It's really worth rediscovering. So that's my recommendation this week.
Awesome. You're selling it very well. Jonas?
It's a tricky one. I don't follow anyone specifically sort of religiously, but I do, like you said, I do look at many different people and their input on social media. I like Mark Cuban, I like Jan LeCun, I like Satya Nadella. But let me give you one name that is more sort of in our space specifically. I kind of recently came across Julia Diaz. Might have been through you, Stefan, somewhere. Don't know her, just sort of happened to find her on LinkedIn fairly recently. But she's posting really interesting thoughts around localization, language, and AI, stuff that is honestly intellectually challenging. It's not the usual stuff, usual takes on loc and AI. Something different. She posted recently around the impact of the language training data on the reasoning layer of LLMs. So not on the actual language output, but on the sort of the reasoning behind it, and what the impact is of having more than 50% of the training data in English on other languages based on the reasoning that sort of underlies those languages as well. So I would recommend to check her LinkedIn posts and her Substack out. It was quite interesting to go through that.
All right, I'll go last with actually, I'm very disappointed nobody says follow Stefan on LinkedIn. That would have been the right answer. No, I'm not that full of myself, but my recommendation actually is a lot more mainstream. I recommend following Mark Andreessen, a longtime staple, and one of the things he said just recently really struck me in the AI era, so to speak. He said something like 99.9% of the value of AI is going to accrue to the users, not the companies that build it. And when you hear that, it sounds extreme, but then he connects it to the history of electricity and the internet and the evolution with smartphones and the fact that they all have very, very common threads with what's going on in AI right now. And AI is becoming infrastructure. It's very interesting to see how it will develop further. Vincent, Wada'a, Jonas, thank you so very much for going over time with us again and spending some more time than was necessary this morning. Great episode. Thank you very much, and see you next time on the Signal Room.
See you soon.